Hello. In this tutorial, we're going to see how to deploy a face recognition web app with Flask plus React. If you ever create a face recognition or face detection or object detection that runs in your localhost 5000, you would notice that it's pretty easy. But once you want it running on the web for everyone to see, it gets a little trickier. I was trying to find different solutions for these problems, but I really couldn't find any. The ones that worked on my local host broke immediately once I tried to run them globally. Then if you're having this trouble, then this is the right video for you. So let's just split the project into 5 steps before starting. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to do our frontend with React. So make sure you have npm install or yarn and React. Then we're going to deploy our frontend in Netlify. Our backend, we're using the Flask micro framework. Then in our case, for face recognition, we're using the library called face recognition. But here is the interesting part. For the computation, you can do whatever you want. You can do object detection, face detection, or video. But for this example, we're doing face recognition. And then finally, we're deploying our backend on Heroku. Now, just before starting, I just want to explain you what's the plan for the project. The first thing to do in our frontend is to access the client's camera. To do that, we're using a library called React Webcam. So let's first open our terminal and create React app Flask frontend. I'm gonna call the project Flask frontend for the frontend part and Flask backend for our backend, but you can name them whatever you want. So in our frontend, we need 2 dependencies. The first one is the React webcam, the one I was just mentioning. And React webcam, what basically does, it's a very nice package that allows for us to access the client's camera and then to save a picture in base64 string. You will see it later on. What does that do, and send it to our backend. So in order to send all of this information to our backend, we're going to use Axios. We could also use fetch, but let's go with Axios. I think it's a little better to use, and it has some advantages. So the second dependency that we need to install is, and I did a little problem. I forgot to cd into it. So let's install Axios. Perfect. And React webcam. Perfect. I'm going to use Sublime Text as the code editor, but you can use absolutely whatever you want. It's not a big difference. Perfect. So the first thing we need to do is to just clean up a little bit here, all the files that we're not going to use. And inside of your source directory, create a new folder. We're going to name it components. And inside of your components folder, create a new file, name webcam.js. So in this file, we're going to use our React webcam package that we installed. And the idea of this file is to access the client's camera, then display a button in order for the user to take a picture, save that picture in base64 string, then send that base64 representation of the image back to our backend, do the computation, and then display the outcome. So the first thing we need to do is to import our dependencies. Now, just for your information, there is a repo in my GitHub account of this code, and also there is a Medium article explaining this code as well in more detail if you are more of a reader learner instead of a video. And one more thing, we're not going to focus at all on the design. The design is going to be pretty ugly. It's going to be just pure functionality. So if you would like to improve the design, just add some CSS into it. So basically this file is going to be one function called webcam capture, and you will see in a minute what it will do. Here we're basically giving we're in this variable over here in video constraints, we're creating an object with key value pair. The width and height, I think they're self-explanatory. And the facing mode user, what this means is that if you're accessing the camera through a device, through a mobile device, then user means the camera facing the user, in this case like the selfie camera. If you would like to access the other camera, the back camera, then just put the correct value. I forgot what it is right now, but just dive into their documentation, and it's pretty simple to use. Now, what we're doing here, we're using a use state. So basically, every time we receive information from our backend through our Axios post request that we're doing here, if the outcome of our backend is the correct name, then the name is gonna get set to that output. Even if it's a stranger, it's also gonna get set to that name. Okay, so this variable over here, it's very important. We're gonna console log it so you see what that variable does. Okay, so remember that we're sending the picture. As you can see, we have this function over here that it's current.getScreenshot that comes with React Webcam. And at the moment that we click the button to take the picture is gonna get saved in base64 string. You will see that in a minute in this variable over here. So we're just console logging it so you see what that is. But just remember that this is the variable that contains the picture. Now for our post request, we are putting right now our backend that it's running on our local host 5000. We still haven't created it, but let's put it right now, and once we create it, it's gonna work. So it's localhost 5000/API, and here we're sending an object with data as its key and the picture in base64 string as its value. Then let's just console log the response. I like to put I like to console log the things like that so it's more clear and we don't get confused. Okay, so here is what I was talking about. Once we send the information to our backend with axios.post. We're sending an object with data as its key and value, the image. Then we're going to send it to our backend, that in this case is going to be Flask API. Localhost 5000/API. Then once we do the computation in our backend and send back the response, then we're going to set the name to the response.data. In this case, is going to be the actual result of our backend, and we're going to display it later on our return statement. Perfect. And right now we're just gonna do the return statement with some basic parameters. Here we're putting audio false because it's a picture, not a video. All of this you can check the documentation, and you can of course put them as you wish. It's pretty simple to use, but for now let's leave them like that. And here's, let me just type the code. So here's the button that I was telling about before. Once the user clicks the button, we're going to see that in a little bit, this callback is going to get triggered. So the first thing is going to happen is this variable is going to save the current state of frame, that is going to be the image in base64 string. Then we're going to send a post request to our backend and then do all the computation that we need to do in our backend. So, and then finally we will need to display the name, that is going to be the result of the backend computation. And just so we don't forget, let's export. I know it may be a little confusing right now, but once we deploy the application, you will see that it's pretty straightforward. So let's delete all of this, and what we're gonna do in React, in app.js, it's basically just display the webcam.js file. You don't need to import this line, but sometimes once in deploy version, it's better to have it because maybe you can get an error. So here we're just putting an h2 tag. Again, the design is pretty ugly. We're not wasting time in the design because it's an experiment purposes, and it's just for demonstration. But if you would like to improve the design, please go ahead and do it. Now let's just export it. Perfect. And if everything went well, let's give it a try to our front end so you can see more dynamically what I meant. So go ahead in your terminal and install it by npm start. If you're using yarn, then use the equivalent of yarn. And we got a small error here. Let's just go to webcam.js, and we accidentally put a comma instead of. Great. Now that we have our app running, let's go to our JavaScript console and click the button. Now, if you see the output, this is very important for you to remember. We have image source, that it's this over here that we logged it, that it's this variable over here that we're taking the screenshot. So if you delete it and do it again, of course, every time you're gonna see a new output because it's a new picture. So at the moment I press the button, the current state of frame, that it's the picture, is gonna get saved in base64 string. So this is the data, that it's the key, and then the value is what we want, that it's image. At the beginning, it's the explanation of what this is, that it's an image, it's a JPEG format converted to base64 string, and it's all of this. Now you will see in our backend that when we create our backend, we will need to delete all of this part, because if you try to decode from base64 string to a JPEG using this part over here, it won't work. So the important thing to remember is that we have in this variable over here saved the image in base64 string. And of course, we get an error, network error, because we don't have our backend running. But it worked. We now have our front end ready. Now let's go ahead and create our backend with Flask. So to do that, let's just create a new folder. We're gonna name it Flask Backend, but you can name it whatever you want. Then inside of our folder, we're gonna create a virtual environment. I highly recommend you using virtual environment. You have more order in your Python projects because you only install the modules in your virtual environment. You consume less memory in your computer. But apart from that, I don't think that's the most important part. The most important part is that you have complete control, so you know exactly which version of each package you're using for your project. So let's create our virtual environment, python 3/m venv. I like to call venv here, but you can call it whatever you want. Now we see that we have it here. Then to activate it, source venv bin activate. Perfect. So now we need to install our dependencies. Just a quick comment for if you ever run into the problem of deploying your backend and you used dlib and in Heroku, you will encounter that it's pretty hard to do it because you always get trouble. So the way to do it, the fix for this solution is to install CMake. If you do it, you won't have any problem, but don't forget to install it. So once you have your virtual environment activated, let's start with pip install click, then pip install CMake, then pip install pillow, then pip install dlib. Now this is gonna take a little time, so I'm gonna pause the video here and return it when it is installed. It's normal, it's gonna take a couple of minutes, so don't worry about it. Great. Now that we have dlib installed, let's install face recognition. Remember that face recognition, it's a package built on dlib. That dlib is a very good state-of-the-art deep learning library, and I think it has 99.7% accuracy in face recognition or something like that. Then let's install Flask. Then let's install Unicorn. We need to install Unicorn because it's going to be our server in order to deploy to Heroku. And finally, let's install Flask Course. This is going to be a dependency to give access to our frontend to basically to allow post and get requests to our backend. I explained that in more detail in a little bit, but just pip install it. Great. Now that we have all of our dependencies, let's go ahead and start with our backend. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to create two files over here. The first one is going to be app.py file, that it's basically the main application, and the second one is going to be facerec.py. So I'm going to copy and paste the code so we don't waste a lot of time in typing because it's a little long. But the main idea is, let me just put the code. Okay, so here it is. I'm gonna do it a little bigger. Okay, so here is the code. Remember, it's called facerec.py inside of our main directory. If you need to copy it, it's also on the GitHub. But let me just explain. So we're creating one class called facerec, and inside of our init, we have known person path file. That what this does is we're gonna create a folder. Let's just create it right now so we don't forget. Named known people, and inside of the folder we need to give a picture of a person that we know. In this case, I'm gonna put myself as an example. So if you see here, we have our picture, and let's put it inside of known people. So okay, so we have here the picture. So basically what we're doing here, it's checking if this picture over here, that it's a known person path file, and the known person path file, if you can see it, it's basically our known people folder that it's here, and then the name of the image. You need to specify here the name of the image, that it's rodrigo.jpg. You can add as many people as you wish here. You can put Alice and facerec, you know, and whatever, and just add the images here. Then the second parameter is the unknown images path file. This is going to be a folder named stranger that is going to get created every time we send information from our frontend to our backend, and it's going to check if this person matches this person, and if it does, then we're going to return the name of the person. You will see it in a more example, but this is basically this library over here, and here is just checking if this person over here matches this person over here. Now, in order to do that, we need to convert. We need to first we have access right now to this picture, but we need to create the other one. But we're gonna do that in the app.py file. But just remember, in this file, everything we're doing, it's telling the face recognition module to check if those two images match. And one image is the one we're giving it here. You can put as many images you want and you can store it in your database, or you can put just one image. It really doesn't make a difference. And the second one is the image that it's taken from our frontend. So you will see it in a little. So the second file we need to create, it's called app.py. And in this one, it's going to be our Flask app. And basically what we're going to do here is just give access to our frontend in order for it to send us post requests and run the application. So let's first import our dependencies. I don't know if we said to with capital R. No. Okay, now that you have all the dependencies installed, something very important to understand, it's this over here, CORS. What CORS means, it's cross-origin resource sharing, and it's basically an HTTP header that allows a server to tell from which origins. It can be like a domain or a port. A browser can permit access. In a more simple explanation, if you don't put CORS to your backend, you are not going to be able to receive post requests or to send information to another server or an API or whatever. So it is very important that you have it, because without it, you're not going to be able to access to other information or for your frontend to send us a post request. So let's first create our Flask app. Then here we need to use the CORS in order to allow the information. Perfect. So now we're gonna create one route that is /API. Then methods, we need post and get. The name of the function is going to be API. And just before starting with everything, I'm just going to print data and return data. So one thing before, so I don't forget, this thing that I'm gonna do right now, it's really not recommended for production purposes. That it's app.run. Flask is not a good server for production. But this is just a small experiment, and the core concept of the video is to explain how to deploy a Flask plus React app on the internet. But if you're planning to have many users, then never do this. There are many different options to how to deploy the app correctly, but for now we're just going to do it like that. So here what we're doing, we're just basically returning the data, so you see what this is. Remember that we're sending here the .post request to our backend, and this called data, but we can name this variable whatever we want. So just remember that we're sending the post request with the image saved in the screenshot. So the request from Flask basically just is saying, hey, which data it's coming, you know. So because first we're allowing permission to our backend to receive information, then we're storing this variable with the request extension from Flask. So basically we're saying all the data that you're sending from our frontend, store it here in the data variable. So if we run, let's run our frontend and our backend just for you to see. If we run our frontend and if we run our backend, let's just save it with Flask run. Flask run. Oop. And we have an error. And the error is we forgot to save this file. Okay, now that we have both running, and this is in our localhost 5000, but remember that once we deploy it on Heroku, it's going to change. And if we go to JavaScript console and we click the button, you will see that, well, this is a response. This is gonna, but you see that the output, we have an issue here, we'll solve it in a little bit, but the output, it's stored in our backend. So this is our backend terminal running. So every time we click, the information gets sent to our backend. So now that we have this in the data variable, we need to do the following: decode it to a JPEG image, so we get saved here, and then do the computation over there. So the first thing we need to do, it's right now that we have the data and we understand what is the data, we need to first add a response. Then this is going to be the directory that we're going to store the image, and we're going to check if there's data. Then if the directory already exists, we want to remove it. Why remove it? So a new directory gets created and a new picture gets saved. Then here we're creating the directory. Then in this variable over here, we're storing the result, that it's the value of data, that it's the image. Then we're converting it to bytes. And then remember what I told you, that we need to grab the part of the image that we need to use, that it's not good for us to have all of this because we cannot use it. We need to grab from here all the way to the end. So basically what we're saying, that it's like saying image index of n all the way to the back, and n means this over here. Then we're saving the image in a pillow format. We're decoding it. Then we're checking if the output, if the images match, the image that we're going to take in our front end match with the image that we have here. So the result of this function needs to be the name because we have it here. So if the result of that function is the name, then we will have it as a response, the name. Else the response is going to be nobody. You can put whatever response you want, but we're just putting the name for now. And we just had a small typo here. We need to put the double dot over there and response with a P. Okay, now that we have our backend ready, let's go ahead and give it a try. First of all, let's start our front end. And let's run our backend with Flask run. Now, everything should be working fine. If we go to our JavaScript console and we take the picture, perfect. We're going to see that we see the output here of the response. And what that is if you remember, in our front end, we sent a post request to our backend/API. Then we set the name to the response.data, that it's basically what we're sending back here, that it's the name. Just let me, just for you to see, if it doesn't detect my face, then it will say nobody. But at the moment it detects my face, it will say my name, because we're sending the image here. So at the moment I click the image, all of this data gets sent to our post request from our front end to our backend. Then it reads the request here. Then it checks if there's data. Then if there's a stranger directory, it removes it. Then it creates it again, and then inside of our stranger, it's the picture that I just took there. So every time I take a new picture, it's gonna get saved there. Then it compares here if it matches with this one, and if it does, then it outputs the name. Again, if you can do this with many different people, you can put here, I don't know, Alice face rec. Then instead of this picture, you put alice.jpg, stranger Alice, and you save the different pictures here. You can put here as many pictures as you want. But we have it. I mean, you see that it works pretty well. Now, one thing that you don't forget is that do not run it like this if you are on a production server and you're planning to do it with a lot of users. But it's working perfectly. We have our front end ready. We have our back end ready. Now let's stop this and let's go to our deployment in Heroku. Now we need to start with Heroku because we're going to have our backend URL that we need to change. If you remember, in our front end, we have this URL right here, but at the moment we change it to Heroku, we will need to change it to the backend URL. So in order to to install to deploy our backend in Heroku, the first thing we need to do is to create a requirements file. So in order to do that, you just put pip freeze requirements dot text. And what this will do is create a and the problem was that I didn't have my virtual environment activated. So don't forget to activate it, because if not, we will have all the requirements from the computer. Okay, now that we have this ready, perfect. So what this does is it tells the deployment server, we need all of these dependencies in order to run the program correctly. Then the second thing we need to do is create a new file named procfile. And in this file, we need to put the following command: web unicorn app. This is for the Heroku server that knows which app to fire up at the moment of initializing. If you would change this file over here, then you will need to change the command. Okay, now that we have all of this ready, the first thing you need to do is you need to have a Heroku account. If you don't have one, then create one. Then it's pretty simple. Just go to heroku.com, create an account, and also install the command line interface or CLI, so we can give it commands through our terminal. So once you have that ready, let's go ahead and start. The first thing we need to do is create a Git repository, so Git init. Then we will see that we have all of this to then git add dot. This adds all the files. Okay, then we're gonna commit them. Then you need to Heroku login. This is gonna ask you to press any key except Q. So let's press it. Login. Once you're logged in, you can close this. And once we're logged in order to create a backend server, you're gonna type Heroku create. So what this is gonna do, this thing is gonna give us a new URL. If you see, it's this one over here. You can change the URL if you want by just pressing Heroku. I think it's Heroku change or Heroku. I forgot the command, but just check it out. And you can change it. And if you have a personal URL that you want to use, it's pretty simple. But let's just use this one for now, so you see it. And the first thing we're gonna do is push it to Heroku. So git push Heroku master. Now this is gonna take a while because of dlive. Remember that if you do not have a CMake installed in your requirements, this will not work. So do that first, and then do the Heroku push. But I highly recommend you to install all of the dependencies that I wrote on the video, because if you are missing one, you're gonna have a lot of troubles with this one. So I'm gonna pause the video because this is gonna take some time, and then once everything is ready, I'm gonna put it back again. Great. So we have, it took like 10-15 minutes, but everything looks okay. So we have our Heroku app deployed. And just to double check, if you go to heroku.com, this is the one we deployed. You can see that it says build succeed. Then if you want to go to the logs, you just click more and logs, and it says build succeed. Now, to see the application, you just click open app. And of course, we're not going to see anything because we're not showing anything. But remember that our URL was this URL that Heroku gave us /API. Now, if we copy, we return this nobody. You don't need to do it, but we just said it. We just returned it for demonstration purposes. Now, if we copy paste this URL, remember this URL is now running globally. Everyone can access to this URL, but this is the backend. But just it's already deployed. So if we copy paste this URL, now if we go, we don't need this anymore. So if we go to our front end, we're here in our front end, and we just need to change this URL to our new URL /API. If I mean, you can do it without /API, but just remember in your backend to not put /API. If we change it to this one, it should work the same. Now, let's give it a try to see that everything is working properly. No, it was Flask frontend, npm start. We just have there a little nothing important, just some typo. Okay, now we're here in our front end. Okay, the URL, it's already in our deployed backend, and let's give it a try. We go to developer JavaScript console. We see that it works. Let's do one more try. If we stop the face, if we block the face, so there's no one there, nobody. If I show my face, it says my name. Perfect. It works amazingly. Now, the last thing we need to do is to deploy our front end in Netlify. That's very easy. Just the only thing we need to do is to create a build directory or package call or whatever you want. So in order to do that, just run npm run build, and basically what that does is that it compresses all of the code, and it compresses into a folder that it's more efficient and it's better to deploy it. So we have out here our build directory, and just create your Netlify account. If you don't have it, just sign in to Netlify. It is pretty easy. Then go to builds. No, I'm sorry, go to sites. Then, I mean, you can create a new one, or there are three types of deployment. One, you can do it either from your GitHub, or the other one is just dragging your directory and dropping it. So site settings, okay, so it's here in deploys, and the only thing you need to do is grab your build directory and grab your build folder and drop it here. Oops, I don't know if it worked. So grab it and drop it. It's uploading. It's gonna take a little bit, but then it should be ready. So again, you have three different type of options. You can do it with your GitHub. There are other Git accounts to do it, or you just drag and drop. So here we have this. This is not our custom domain. This is one that Neplify gave us, but you can basically add your own custom domain. It is pretty simple. I mean, I'm not an expert in Netlify. I've used it a couple of times, but the UI it's pretty simple to use. Now, one thing that I forgot to mention is that if you deploy your front end in another platform, it is very important that you have HTTPS. That it's basically a secure version of HTTP through encryption. It encrypts the data in order to send information. If you do not use HTTPS, the information is not gonna go. The request is not gonna get allowed to access the camera. Okay, so it's published. Now let's go to here. This is our global URL. And if we see it's running perfectly, it's a secure connection. That it means that it's HTTPS. Again, this domain is the one Netlify gave us, but we can custom it to whatever we want. So if we click, it says the name. One more trial, nobody. Okay, we have the application deployed on our front end and back end, and it's working perfectly.